The smell of sawdust never really leaves a workshop. Even after you hang up the tools for the night, it stays in your clothes, your hair, the creases of your hands. I've always liked that. It meant something had been built. I was 68 years old, and I had been building things my whole life. The shop behind the house was mine. 1,200 square feet of organized chaos, 2 bandsaws, a lathe I'd bought secondhand from a man in Sudbury who was retiring, and walls lined with every hand tool I'd collected over 40 years of cabinet making. I'd started the business with nothing but a truck, a skill set, and the kind of stubbornness that my late wife, God rest her, called your best quality and your worst one, depending on the day. I wasn't wealthy the way people mean when they say the word wealthy. I didn't have a vacation property in Muskoka or a boat docked anywhere. What I had was paid-off land, a pension, a portfolio my accountant described as quietly impressive, and a reputation in the trade that meant my phone hadn't stopped ringing in 4 decades. Custom built-ins for a heritage home in the annex, a kitchen renovation for a judge in Ottawa, staircases, mantels, library shelves, the kind of work that people hire you for once and then recommend you to everyone they know for the rest of their lives. My daughter, Fiona, had grown up watching me work. She used to fall asleep on the old couch I kept in the corner of the shop when she was small, curled up with a library book while I planed boards. She was 31 now, and she had her mother's eyes and her mother's laugh, and I'd always believed her mother's judgment. I had started to wonder about that last part. She'd met her fiancé at a charity gala 18 months before the wedding. His name was Thaddeus. He went by Thad, and he was 35, the son of a commercial real estate developer from North York. He was the kind of man who wore a suit the way other men wear armor, and who had a handshake that was calibrated to communicate exactly how much more important he believed himself to be than you. The first time he came to the house for dinner, he looked around my kitchen with the polite, flattened expression people use when they're trying to hide the fact that they've already decided something is beneath them. He complimented the rustic feel. I smiled and passed him the potatoes. I told myself it was just a manner. Some people are raised in glass towers and don't know how to look at anything that isn't reflecting them back. I gave him time. I watched. Over 18 months I watched. He never asked about the shop, never asked what I was working on, never paused at the doorway when he walked past. To him, it was a garage with noise in it. He asked Fiona once, at Sunday dinner, whether she'd thought about what she'd do with all this property someday. I was sitting right across the table from him. I kept watching. Fiona seemed happy. That was the thing that kept me from saying anything I couldn't take back. When she looked at him, something in her face went soft and certain the way her mother's used to, when she'd made up her mind about something. I didn't want to be the father who poisoned that. I'd seen what that did to families. I'd watched it happen to my brother and his kids, and I swore I'd never be the one holding the wrench in the works. So, when Fiona asked if I'd help pay for the wedding, I said yes. Not because she couldn't manage something herself. She had a good job in hospital administration. She was practical. She was careful with money the way I'd raised her to be. She asked because the wedding Thad's family wanted was the kind of wedding that required the kind of money that takes decades to accumulate. The venue alone was a restored heritage property east of Toronto, one of those 19th-century limestone estates, with a chandelier in the main hall and a catering minimum that would have paid my first truck off twice over. 320 guests on the combined lists, a sit-down dinner, a string quartet for the ceremony. I agreed to cover $240,000. That was the number we landed on after going through everything together on a Sunday afternoon at my kitchen table. Fiona with a spreadsheet on her laptop, me with a notepad and a cup of tea that went cold while we worked. I wrote the first check that evening. I want to be clear about something. I gave that money because I wanted to, not because Thad's family expected it, not because of any social arithmetic, not because I was trying to buy my way into anyone's regard. I gave it because it was my daughter's wedding, and I wanted her to have the day she'd imagined. That was all. It had nothing to do with Thad. As it turned out, neither did the wedding. The call came on a Thursday evening in late September. I remember the light was going, that particular flat gold of late afternoon in Ontario that only exists for about 10 days a year before the cold comes in and takes the color out of everything. I was in the shop finishing the last details on a set of cabinet doors for a client in Rosedale. My hands were steady. The radio was on. It was a good day. My phone buzzed on the workbench. I looked at the screen. That I'd heard from him directly maybe 6 times in 18 months. I set down the chisel and answered, "Hey, yeah." So, he'd always talked like that, with the first half of a sentence used up before he got to the actual sentence. "We've been doing a final review of the guest list with the coordinator, and the venue has some capacity adjustments we need to work around. Some hard decisions had to be made." I waited. "The thing is," he said, and I could hear him choosing his words the way a man chooses footing on ice, "it's really going to be a very curated event, very focused on, the people who are really central to our lives, going forward." "All right," I said. "Fiona and I talked about it." He said this quickly, which told me that Fiona did not know he was calling me, and we think it makes more sense for the day to really be about our immediate world. The people who are part of our social circle, our future, The shop was very quiet. Even the radio seemed to wait. "What are you telling me, Thad?" I said. "It wasn't really a question. We're keeping it to people who are relevant," he said, "to the life we're building. And it's nothing personal, it's just, there are priorities, and the guest list reflects those priorities, and we think it's better for everyone if the day is streamlined." There it was. I want to tell you that I shouted. I want to tell you that I said something that cracked him open right there on the phone. Something so precise and so final that he understood in that moment exactly what he'd done. But that isn't what happened. What happened was silence. I let it sit there between us for a long time. Long enough that he said, "Hello?" Once, uncertain. "I heard you," I said. "I know that's fine," I said. And then I hung up. I set the phone face down on the workbench. I picked up the chisel. I looked at the cabinet door in front of me, at the line I'd been cutting before the phone rang, and I finished it. Clean and true, the way I'd been taught, the way I'd done 10,000 times before. Then I sat down on the stool by the window and looked out at my backyard. The old maple that had been there since before I bought the property. The raised beds where I grew tomatoes every summer. The fence I'd built myself from cedar, tight and straight and still standing after 22 years. And I thought for a long time. I wasn't angry the way people expect when they hear this story. Anger is a fire, and fire burns through things fast. What I felt was something slower and more deliberate. It was the feeling of a man who has been told plainly what he is worth to someone, and who has decided to take that information seriously. I was not a relevant person. All right then. The first call I made was to my accountant. She had been handling my affairs for 16 years, and I had never once called her at 7 in the evening, so she knew before I finished the first sentence that something had changed. "I need to freeze the disbursements," I said. "All of them. Everything related to the wedding account." She asked me once if I was certain. I said I was. She said she'd have it done before morning. The second call I made was to the venue coordinator. His name was Marshall, and I'd spoken to him 3 times over the past several months during the planning process. He was meticulous and professional, and he had always treated me with the kind of straightforward courtesy I appreciated. I apologized for calling at that hour. I told him there had been a change in circumstances, and I needed to discuss the financial arrangements. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Of course, Mr. Whitaker. Should I start the cancellation process?" "Yes," I said. "I want to be fair to your team. Whatever penalties apply, I'll honor them. But the account stops today. I want to be honest about this because the people who've questioned this part are right to question it. I did not walk away from the vendors. There were deposits that had been paid, the caterer, the florist, the photographer, the musicians. Each of those contracts had terms. I called each of them. I told them the event was canceled due to a change in family circumstances. Where cancellation penalties applied, I paid them. Where deposits were non-refundable, I didn't dispute them. The people who had reserved their time and their services for my daughter's day had done nothing wrong. I had no interest in punishing them. What I canceled was everything going forward. What I withdrew was everything that hadn't yet been released. $204,000 returned to the account it had come from. I slept well that night. That surprised me, but it was true. I lay in the same bed I'd slept in for 20 years, the room still arranged the way my wife had arranged it. Her reading lamp still on her side of the nightstand. and I slept the way I used to sleep after a hard day's work when I was young, complete, and without dreaming. Fiona called me the next morning at 8:15. I was in the garden. October had started moving in, and I was turning the beds over before the ground got too hard, working the compost in. I had my gloves on. The air smelled like earth and leaves, and the particular cold that comes off the lake when the season changes. I let it ring through to voicemail. Then I listened to the message. She wasn't angry in the message. She sounded, if anything, confused. She said Thad had told her there was some financial issue with the wedding account, and that she was trying to understand what had happened. She said she'd call me back. I took off my gloves and called her directly. "Dad." Her voice was careful. "What happened?" "I withdrew my funding from the wedding," I said. "I wanted you to hear that clearly and from me." A pause. "Thad said there was a problem with the account." "Thad called me Thursday evening," I said. "He told me the guest list had been curated. He said the event was being kept to people who were relevant to the life you're building." Another pause. Longer. "He told you that?" "He did." I heard her breathe in, the way she used to when she was a little girl, and she'd been told something she didn't want to accept yet, but knew she had to. "Dad?" "Fiona," I said, and I kept my voice even, the same voice I used when I was teaching her how to measure twice and cut once when she was 12 years old. "I've given that man every reasonable chance. I've been patient because I love you, but a man who calls your father, the man paying for his wedding, to tell him he isn't important enough to attend, that man is telling you something. He's telling you what he believes about your people, about where you come from, about what he intends to bring you into, and what he intends to leave behind." She didn't say anything. "I'm not asking you to agree with me today," I said. "I'm asking you to listen to what I just told you." I went back to the garden. I finished the beds. I made lunch, ate it alone at the kitchen table with the radio on, and then went into the shop and got back to work on the Rosedale cabinet doors. Thad called 4 times over the next 2 days. I didn't answer. On the 3rd day, he and Fiona drove up together. I heard the car in the driveway and didn't go inside. I was in the back, splitting some firewood I'd been meaning to get to. I heard the door, heard footsteps on the path, and then I heard Thad's voice, elevated and working hard to sound reasonable. "Mr. Whitaker, you can call me by my first name," I said, without stopping. "You've been calling me Gordon for a year and a half. Gordon." He came around the corner of the house with Fiona just behind him. He was wearing the kind of casual clothes that cost more than most people's work clothes. "There's been a misunderstanding. The call I made, I didn't express myself correctly. You are absolutely welcome at the wedding." I set the axe down and looked at him. He was smiling. It was the smile of a man who had run the numbers and concluded that the correct answer was charm. "What I said," he continued, "was poorly worded. We're under a lot of stress with the planning, and I misspoke. Obviously, your family, of course you're important." I looked past him at Fiona. She wasn't smiling. She was watching me with her mother's eyes, and in those eyes I saw something I recognized. The particular expression of a person who has spent 2 days listening and is no longer sure of what they're hearing. "Thad," I said, "I want to ask you a question, and I want you to think before you answer." He nodded, still smiling. "When you called me Thursday, did you intend to tell me I wasn't welcome at my daughter's wedding?" A pause. Not long enough to mean genuine reflection, long enough to mean calculation. "I expressed myself badly," he said again. "That's not what I asked." The smile held. "It was impressive, actually, the discipline of it. I think," I said, "that you said exactly what you meant. I think you did the math on this situation, and you decided that what you wanted from my family was the money, and not the man. And I think you made a call Thursday assuming I'd be quiet about it, the way you've assumed for a year and a half that I don't notice things." I picked up the axe and set it on the block. "The account is closed. The vendors have been settled. The venue has been notified. Whatever wedding you choose to have from here on out, that's between you and your family." Fiona said, "Dad." "Sweetheart," I said, and my voice did something then that I hadn't planned for, something that came up from somewhere underneath all the steadiness. "You are the most important thing in my life. You have been since the day you were born. I will be at any celebration you want me at, for the rest of my life, whenever you want me there." I looked at Thad. "But I will not pay for a celebration designed to exclude me." Thad stood very still. The smile was gone now. and what was underneath it was what I'd been watching for 18 months. The cold arithmetic of a man who has never been told no by someone he'd already decided wasn't worth his attention. "You're making this very difficult," he said. "I imagine I am," I said. He left first, walked back around the side of the house without another word, and I heard the car door, and then I heard him sit in the driveway for a long time. Fiona didn't leave. She stood in the backyard with her arms crossed and looked at the maple tree for a while. Then she said, without turning around, "He said you'd make it about money." "He's right that I made it about money," I said. "He's wrong about why." She turned around and looked at me, and I watched her work through some long private accounting that I wasn't part of and couldn't rush. "He told me it was his coordinator's idea," she said. "The guest list, that it came from the venue side, and then he said he called you himself to explain, because he wanted to be respectful." She looked at me. "He didn't tell me what he said to you." "No," I said. "I expect he didn't." She was quiet for a long time. The leaves on the maple moved in the October wind, dry and rattling, a sound I've heard every fall of my life and that still strikes me as one of the loneliest sounds in the world. "Can I come in?" she said finally. "I'd like some tea." We went inside. We sat at the same kitchen table where we'd done the spreadsheet months before, and I made a pot of tea, and we sat there until well past dark. She asked me to tell her everything Thad had said, word for word as best I could remember, and I told her. She listened without interrupting. She asked questions. She was thorough and methodical, the way her mother had been, the way she is about everything that matters to her. I didn't tell her what to do. I didn't say a word about what decision she should make. That wasn't mine to give. What I told her, once, near the end of the evening, when the tea was long gone and the kitchen had gone quiet and still, was this: the man you marry will decide 1,000 things with you over the course of your life. He'll decide what you spend and what you save. He'll decide how you treat people who have nothing to offer him. He'll decide what your children learn about what a person is worth. Every one of those decisions will come from the same place Thursday's call came from. Fiona looked at her hands on the table. "I know," she said. She stayed the night in her old room. In the morning she made coffee and scrambled eggs, and we sat together for an hour before she drove back to the city, and she hugged me at the door for a long time, and I let her. I heard from her 3 weeks later. She called on a Sunday morning, and her voice was steady and clear, the way voices get when a decision has been made, and the grief of it has been felt and put in its proper place. She told me it was over, that she had asked Thad to leave, that he had not taken it well, that his family had called her with various things to say, that she had listened politely and said goodbye. She was staying with a friend for a while until she figured out next steps. She said she was okay. She said she'd been thinking about what I'd told her, not the last thing, the one I'd said near midnight over cold tea, but the thing I'd said in the backyard about celebration and exclusion. "You didn't make it about money," she said. "You made it about what the money meant." I was quiet. "He was always a little embarrassed by you," she said. I told myself I was imagining it. I wasn't imagining it. "No," I said. "You weren't." She asked if she could come up for Thanksgiving. I told her the turkey wasn't going to eat itself. She laughed, and for a moment she sounded 12 years old, laughing in the shop while wood shavings collected on the floor around the couch. The leaves came down that October all at once, the way they do in a real Ontario fall. I raked the yard on a Saturday afternoon, the maple giving up everything it had in a single long exhale, and I bagged it all and stacked it at the end of the drive. The shop smelled of sawdust and linseed oil. The lathe was running. The Rosedale cabinet doors had been delivered 2 weeks before, and there was a new commission waiting. A young couple in Hamilton who were restoring a Victorian and wanted built-in bookcases for the library. I'd gone out to see the space and come home with a dozen photographs and a notebook full of measurements, and the particular quiet satisfaction of a man who has been given a good problem to solve. I'm not a man who expects to be thanked. I'm not a man who needs applause. I built a business with my hands and raised a daughter by myself for 15 years after her mother died, and I never once needed anyone to tell me I was important. But I will tell you this, plainly, as one person to another. The day I hung up that phone, I chose something. I chose what I'd built over 40 years. The work, the reputation, the slow and unglamorous accumulation of a life lived straight. I chose the workshop and the garden and the old maple and the grandmother clock in the hall that needs winding every 8 days. I chose my daughter's future over my daughter's wedding. I would make the same choice again tomorrow.